On December 11th, 1241, the most feared warrior king in human history choked on his own vomit. Wine dribbled from Ögedei Khan's lips as his body convulsed against silk cushions. The man who commanded armies that moved like lightning across continents couldn't lift his own head. His generals watched their supreme leader's eyes roll back. The architects of humanity's most efficient killing machine stood helpless as their Khan drowned in cheap alcohol. Outside his tent, 50,000 Mongol warriors prepared to crush Vienna. Their horses stamped in the December cold, breath steaming like dragon smoke. These men had turned city walls to dust from Beijing to Baghdad. They'd stacked skulls higher than palace rooftops. Tomorrow, they would pour into Europe's heart. But inside that tent, their leader's liver was failing. The death rattle echoed off felt walls. This wasn't how conquerors died. Not the heir to Genghis Khan. Not the man who'd perfected his father's vision of world domination. Ögedei's fingers clawed at nothing. His body, trained from childhood to endure starvation and frostbite, surrendered to fermented mare's milk and Chinese wine. The most disciplined military force ever assembled was about to retreat because their leader couldn't discipline himself. Europe's survival balanced on a failing organ. How did a culture engineer warriors so ruthlessly efficient that only their leader's alcoholism saved Western civilization from extinction? To understand Europe's miraculous deliverance, we must rewind through the most terrifying military innovation in human history, the systematic transformation of children into living weapons who conquered 40% of the known world. The scouts brought numbers that made no sense. 55,000 skulls stacked outside Merv, 24 days to count the corpses at Urgench, 700,000 dead in an afternoon at Zhongdu. Medieval armies didn't kill like this. They couldn't. A knight might cut down 10 men in a battle, 20 on his best day. The Mongols averaged 100 kills per warrior per campaign. The general raised his hand. 2 words fell from his lips like stones into water. Feed the horses. That simple command would empty cities from the Caspian to the Yellow Sea. Not a battle cry. Not a threat. Just livestock management that happened to require human corpses. The killing started with mathematics. Every Mongol male between 15 and 60 rode to war. No exceptions. No farmers staying home for harvest. No merchants minding shops. Total mobilization meant their armies moved with the entire nation's strength. But here was their genius. They needed fewer men because they killed more efficiently than anyone in history. A European army of 50,000 needed 200,000 supporters. Cooks, servants, prostitutes, merchants, priests. The baggage train stretched for miles. Mongols brought 5 horses per man and nothing else. When they needed supplies, they took cities. When cities resisted, they fed the horses. The logistics officer tallied deaths like grain shipments. Nishapur, 1,700,000. Herat, 1,600,000. The numbers climbed so high that Persian historians started inventing words for quantities that hadn't existed before. The Mongols turned massacre into an industrial process centuries before industry existed. They developed a formula. Surround the city, cut the water, wait 3 days, send Chinese engineers to the walls with their strange machines that threw fire and stone, offer one chance surrender and live as slaves, or resist and cease to exist. Most cities chose pride. The Mongols always kept their promise. When the walls fell, the real mathematics began. First, they separated the useful. Engineers lived. The Mongols collected them like weapons. Craftsmen who could work metal or weave silk joined the growing army of slaves. Young women became commodities. Everyone else became statistics. The killing squads worked in units of 10, just like their military structure. Each unit had a quota. Miss your number and face execution yourself. The most efficient teams developed techniques. Line them up beside irrigation ditches. The flowing water carried away the blood. Use the city's own warehouses as killing floors. Make the first 1,000 dig graves for the rest. But efficiency meant nothing without speed. The Mongols conquered more territory in 25 years than Rome managed in 400. They moved like a plague because they killed like one too completely, systematically, without pause for conscience or celebration. While European armies held victory feasts, Mongol units already rode toward the next city. The The Chinese engineer captured at Beijing later wrote about watching his new master's work. "They sorted humans like grain," he recorded. "This pile for killing, that pile for slavery, a third for specialized labor. He designed catapults that could breach any wall. Now he watched those walls collapse onto populations he'd helped defend. His calculations saved his life. Collaboration meant survival. Resistance meant joining the sorted piles. Distance became their weapon. Strike Baghdad while the Caliph still celebrated victories against their scouts. Appear at Vienna's gates while European kings debated whether Mongols even existed. They covered 60 miles a day when European armies managed 15. The apocalypse arrived at gallop speed. Here's what broke medieval minds. The Mongols felt nothing. No hatred for enemies, no joy in victory. They killed like men harvesting wheat, steady and methodical, until the field stood empty. European chroniclers described demonic glee, supernatural evil. They needed monsters to explain the magnitude. The truth was worse. The Mongols simply did arithmetic with human lives. A city of 300,000 became zero in 72 hours. The only sound afterward, horses chewing on the spring grass growing between corpses. But to understand how feeding horses became a death sentence for millions, we need to see where these killers came from. The formula for forging such men began decades earlier, with children who learned to ride before they could walk. The mother pressed her newborn against her chest. His wails echoed through the felt walls of their ger. Outside, horses thundered past. Another raid, another village burning somewhere beyond the steppes. She whispered the name she'd chosen months ago, Temujin. But when the shaman arrived to bless the child, she spoke different words. His name is Temubish, not human. The shaman understood. Across the steppes, mothers made this choice. Name your child something worthless. Call them dog, worm, nobody. The spirits wouldn't steal what had no value. Raiders wouldn't bother killing what wasn't human. The curse became protection in a world where childhood meant surviving until you were useful. Genghis Khan knew this ritual intimately. His own name meant ocean or universal ruler, depending on which scholar you asked. But his childhood name was different. Temujin. Just iron. Basic metal. Nothing special. His father died when he was 9, poisoned by rivals who considered one more orphan boy meaningless. They calculated wrong. The orphan learned to eat roots and rodents. He killed his half-brother over a fish, not from hunger but for hierarchy. Even starving children needed to know who commanded. The boy named for common metal discovered that violence was simply another tool. Use it correctly, and you lived another day. Use it poorly, and join the frozen corpses dotting the steppes. Childhood on the steppes meant learning death's rhythm before you understood life's. Boys received their first bow at 3. Not a toy, a weapon scaled to tiny hands. Miss your shot at a marmot, and your family might not eat. Miss your shot at a rival tribe's scout, and your family might not survive. The bow taught a simple lesson. Accuracy meant everything. Second chances meant nothing. The training started before memory. Infants strapped to horses learned balance through terror. Fall off, and the tribe moved on. No mother could stop for a child who couldn't keep up. The horses taught what the steppes demanded. Speed saved you. Hesitation killed you. Sentiment was luxury no one could afford. By 5, children could shoot from galloping horses. By 7, they hunted in packs like wolves. By 10, they'd killed. Not in battle. That came later. But in the 1,000 small violences that shaped survivors. A boy who couldn't butcher a sheep became a sheep himself. Weakness invited predation. The algebra was simple. The ones named not human learned to make the title truth. They stuffed grass in their boots during winter freezes. They drank blood from their horses' veins when water ran out. They learned to sleep in the saddle during 3-day rides. Human limits became suggestions. Pain became information. Comfort became foreign. Some broke. Their bones decorated the migration routes. Natural selection operated at terrible speed, but those who survived emerged as something new. Not quite human anymore. Something harder. Something that could ride 1,000 miles and arrive ready to fight. something that could watch a city burn and feel nothing but mild satisfaction at a job complete. The shamans said these children carried wolves' spirits. The Chinese observers used different words. They wrote about boys who laughed while practicing on prisoners, who competed to see whose arrow could pin the most bodies together, who treated killing like other children treated games, because for them, it was a game, the only one that mattered. Mongol children learned to count by tallying kills during hunts. 10 rabbits, 20 birds. By adolescence, the rabbits became enemies. The counting never stopped. This wasn't cruelty. This was curriculum. Every dead thing taught efficiency. Waste an arrow on a rabbit and you might not have it for a rival. Make death quick and you could move to the next target. Make it slow and you'd fall behind quota. The orphan Temujin perfected these lessons. When rivals captured him, he killed the guard with the same casual precision he'd once used on marmots. When they pursued, he hid in river water for 9 hours. Cold was just information. Fear was just data. Survival required processing both without letting either control you. The boy named for iron was becoming steel. But steel needs tempering. The children who survived infancy faced something worse. They'd learned to ride like demons and shoot like gods. They'd discovered that humans were just complex animals with predictable patterns. Now they needed to learn to hunt the most dangerous game, themselves. The great hunts would teach them how. A child named Not Human would need training to match his title. The toddler gripped the horse's mane with fingers barely strong enough to hold a cup. His mother had tied him to the saddle at dawn. Now the sun blazed overhead, and his legs had gone numb hours ago. The horse shifted weight. The child swayed but didn't fall. Falling meant death. Every Mongol child understood this before they understood words. 3-year-olds learned to steer before they could reliably walk. Their bones bent to match the horse's spines. Their muscles memorized rhythms no infantry soldier could comprehend. The Romans who faced these riders decades later wrote about centaurs, half-man, half-beast creatures that moved with supernatural unity. The Romans weren't wrong. They just didn't understand the engineering behind the myth. The training started in the womb. Pregnant women rode until labor pains began. Newborns heard hoofbeats before heartbeats. Mothers sang lullabies that matched the rhythm of cantering horses. The smell of horse sweat mixed with breast milk in every child's earliest memories. This wasn't tradition. This was programming. By age 4, children rode their own mounts. Not ponies, full horses. The kind that could crush a skull with one misplaced hoof. Parents watched their toddlers struggle onto backs taller than most men. No help came. The child who needed assistance mounting would need assistance in battle. Better to learn now. Better to break the weak ones early. The accidents came daily. Broken arms, shattered ribs. Children trampled when they lost their grip during gallops. Their bodies healed crooked around horse-shaped lives. Bow legs became standard. Spines curved to match saddles. Walking distances that horses could cover seemed absurd. Why use inferior transportation? Their bodies adapted until dismounting felt like amputation. Training advanced with brutal simplicity. 5-year-olds played games that would terrify modern parents. Chase the rabbit meant full gallop pursuit of actual prey. First child to grab it won. Miss your grip at 30 miles per hour, and the ground taught consequences. Tag meant riding close enough to touch another rider without colliding. Miscalculate, and both horses might shatter legs. The games eliminated those with slow reflexes. Survivors emerged with reaction times measured in heartbeats. The fusion went deeper than muscle memory. Children learned to sense their horses' moods through tiny shifts in breathing. A tightened flank meant danger ahead. Flattened ears meant prepare for violence. The boundary between rider and mount dissolved until conscious thought became unnecessary. The horse's instincts became the child's instincts. The child's intent became the horse's action. 2 nervous systems merged into one weapon. Sleep happened in saddles during migration. Children discovered they could dream while riding. Their bodies maintained balance through pure conditioning. Wake them suddenly, and they'd already have weapons drawn. The subconscious learned what consciousness couldn't process. Total integration with an animal that could cover 60 miles without rest. Roman cavalry trained for years to achieve half this unity. Mongol children achieved it before losing their milk teeth. The dietary fusion matched the physical. Mare's milk sustained riders for days. Fresh horse blood provided iron when meat ran short. Children learned to open veins without killing their mounts. Just enough to survive, never enough to weaken tomorrow's ride. The horse fed you. You protected the horse. Simple economics written in blood and milk. The symbolism escaped no one. You literally consumed your transportation. You became what carried you to war. By 7, children could fire arrows at full gallop with accuracy that made Chinese generals weep. The mechanics defied physics. Draw a bowstring while controlling 1,000 pounds of muscle moving at 30 miles per hour. Aim while bouncing hard enough to shatter teeth. Release between heartbeats when both you and your target moved at different speeds. Missing meant shame. Shame meant death. So, they didn't miss. The psychological fusion created something unprecedented. These weren't riders on horses. These were single organisms with human intelligence and equine power. When Mongol armies appeared on horizons, witnesses described flowing water or swarms of insects. The imagery was accurate. Individual identity vanished into collective motion. 50,000 rider horse units moving as one tide. No single commander could create such coordination. The programming happened in childhood, encoded into bones and breath. European knights spent decades learning mounted combat. They climbed onto horses like men boarding ships, magnificent warriors who happened to ride. The Mongols were different. They were horses that happened to have human torsos. The distinction mattered when armies met. Knights fought from horseback, Mongols fought as horseback. Grammatically incorrect, tactically unstoppable. The children who survived this training could sleep, eat, defecate, make love, and die without dismounting. Campaigns lasted months without touching solid ground. Their bodies forgot how walking was supposed to feel. Put them on foot and they moved like sailors on land. Unsteady, vulnerable, wrong. But on horseback, they became death incarnate, faster than any message warning of their approach, more unified than any force trying to stop them. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about meeting Hunnic cavalry, the Mongols' spiritual ancestors. He described men whose legs had curved to grip horses' barrels, whose backs hunched forward permanently, who looked deformed until they mounted. Then they transformed into perfect killing machines. The Romans thought this was racial. They didn't understand it was engineering. Generations of selection pressure, creating humans optimized for mounted warfare. But riding was just the foundation. The real transformation required something more elaborate. The great hunts would teach these horse children to become something beyond human or animal. They would learn to think like prey in order to become perfect predators. The nerge hunts awaited, where 10,000 riders would practice on animals what they'd soon perfect on cities. The circle began at dawn. 20,000 riders spread across the horizon like spilled ink. Their horses moved with practiced silence. No commands shouted, no horns blown, just the soft crunch of hooves on frozen grass as the line stretched wider, wider, until it encompassed mountains, valleys, rivers, a living noose 300 miles in circumference. This was the nerge, the great hunt, where children learned to kill with the patience of glaciers. The signal came as sunlight touched the eastern peaks. A single arrow fired straight up. The circle began to close. Not quickly. Speed would spook the prey too soon. The riders moved at walking pace. Deer raised their heads. Wolves stirred in their dens. Bears woke to something wrong in the morning air. The humans were moving wrong. Not passing through. Not hunting normally. Surrounding. Every rider knew his position by instinct. 10-year-old boys rode between veterans who'd closed 100 circles. The youngest learned through terror. Let a rabbit escape through your section and face 20 lashes. Let a deer break the line and lose your horse. Let a wolf slip past and join the prey inside the circle. The mathematics was simple. Perfect coordination or death. The animals sensed it first. That creeping wrongness as escape routes vanished. A deer path that led to riders. A river crossing blocked by horses. The circle was still 50 miles wide, but already the trap was sprung. Predators and prey found themselves pushed together. Wolves brushed against sheep. Eagles landed near rabbits. Natural law suspended inside the closing ring. Everything focused on one shared truth. The horses were coming. By noon, the circle had tightened to 30 miles. The outriders could see each other now, tiny specks maintaining perfect distance. The animals in the center began to cluster. Herds merged. Packs joined. Species that would never interact suddenly pressed flank to flank. The sound started low, a rumble of hooves and paws and claws on earth. It would grow until it drowned out thought. The riders carried no food. For 2 days they would eat nothing, drink only what their horses provided. This was training. Warriors who stopped for meals created gaps in lines. Gaps meant failure. Failure meant everything inside the circle lived while you died. So they rode with empty stomachs and perfect spacing. Hunger sharpened the mind. Comfort made you weak. The nerge taught both lessons without words. Communication happened through motion. A rider raising his bow meant large prey ahead. Lowering it meant adjust spacing. The commands rippled along the line faster than shouted orders. 20,000 minds thinking as one organism. The children watched veterans for cues. Copy perfectly or face consequences. The system allowed no innovation, no creativity, just mechanical perfection repeated until muscle memory replaced thought. By the second dawn, the circle had shrunk to 10 miles. The sound was thunder now, continuous, maddening. Inside the ring, animals went insane from proximity. Bears attacked wolves. Wolves tore into deer still running. The grass turned to mud from too many hooves in too little space. The smell of fear rose like fog. Predators and prey shared one emotion now, terror of what closed around them. The youngest riders struggled to maintain composure. Their horses felt the wrongness too. Every instinct screamed to flee, to break formation, to escape the growing cacophony of death. But the children held their lines. They'd learned before memory that discipline meant survival. Let your horse bolt, and you'd be trampled by the riders behind you. The nerge forgave nothing. 3 miles now. The animals inside could see the ring of horses, a solid wall of mounted death. No gaps, no mercy. Some prey animals simply stopped running, stood still, and waited. Others ran directly at the horses in desperate charges. The riders held, arrows nocked but not fired, not yet. The circle must close completely first. Then the mathematics would begin. At 1 mile, the sound was everything. The earth shook from thousands of animals compressed into impossible density. Bears climbed over deer, wolves ran across the backs of sheep. The circle had become an arena where nature's rules meant nothing. Only one rule remained. The horses would feed. The final compression took precision that decades of practice created. Riders could reach across and touch their neighbors now. The animals inside had nowhere left to run. They turned in maddened circles. Attacked each other. Attacked themselves. The pressure of absolute terror making them tear their own flesh. The children watched it all. Memorized every detail. This was their graduation ceremony. The killing began with method, not madness. Designated riders entered the circle first. They selected the largest predators. Bears, wolves. The dangerous ones that might break the line if left alive. Arrows found throats with surgical precision. No wasted shots. No wild firing. Each arrow cost resources. Each miss meant punishment. The children counted every shot, measured every death. This was arithmetic with heartbeats. Next came the sorting. Riders separated animals like merchants arranging goods. Deer to one side, rabbits to another, fur-bearing creatures in their own section. The living inventory of the steppes catalogued for systematic harvest. Some animals they released, pregnant females, the youngest offspring, just enough to ensure next year's hunt. The Mongols understood sustainable slaughter before the concept existed. But most died. The riders worked in shifts, 10 men killing while 10 rested. The children too young for killing duty-skinned corpses, sorted meat, counted pelts. Everyone had quotas. Miss your number and explain to the tribe why winter would be harder. The elders watched from the circle's edge, memorizing which children showed aptitude, which hesitated, which enjoyed it too much. The systematic nature broke some children. They'd grown up with death, but not like this. Not industrial. Not mechanical. The nerge stripped killing of passion, purpose, even hatred. It became mere function. Input arrows, output corpses. The transformation showed in their eyes. The ones who succeeded stopped seeing individual animals, started seeing numbers, resources, problems to solve, the same expression they'd wear later when surrounding cities. By sunset, the ground inside the circle was unrecognizable. Blood-soaked earth that would grow nothing for years, pyramids of sorted bones. Children learned to read wealth in corpse piles. This many pelts meant surviving winter. This much dried meat meant strength for raids. The arithmetic of survival written in systematic death. They'd practice these calculations on humans soon enough. The nerge happened 4 times yearly. Each hunt refined the mechanism, tightened the process. By adolescence, participants could close a circle blindfolded. Their bodies knew the rhythm. Their minds had absorbed the lesson. Perfect coordination created perfect killing. Individual will meant nothing. Collective action meant everything. The same principle would let 50,000 riders move like water across continents. Veterans shared stories during the skinning. How Genghis Khan once used the nerge to trap an entire enemy army, closed the circle around men instead of animals. The killing took 3 days. The principle remained identical. Surround, compress, slaughter, sort. The children listened while their hands mechanically processed corpses. Understanding dawned in stages. These weren't just hunts. These were rehearsals. The final lesson came with the count. Every arrow retrieved and tallied. Every pelt recorded. Every pound of meat weighed. The children who'd miscounted faced consequences. The ones who'd wasted shots received worse. But harshest punishment went to any who'd let prey escape. A single rabbit breaking the line meant failure for everyone. Individual mistakes had collective consequences, just like in war. Some children emerged from their first nerge changed. Their mothers noticed it immediately. The way they looked at younger siblings. Counting, measuring, sorting. The mechanism had taken root. These ones would become generals. The ones who could surround Beijing and methodically reduce 3 million to 0. Who could compress the population of Baghdad into killing fields. Who saw humans as complex animals requiring similar solutions. But the nerge taught subtler lessons too. Patience that could maintain a formation for days. Silence that let 20,000 move without alerting prey. Trust that your neighbor would hold his position absolutely. These skills would let Mongol armies appear like magic on city horizons. Would let them coordinate attacks across mountain ranges. Would make them move like natural forces rather than human armies. The children learned something else in those blood-soaked circles. The absolute nature of collective will. When 20,000 acted as one, individual conscience became irrelevant. Personal squeamishness meant betraying everyone. The mechanism was larger than any component, more important than any hesitation. This psychological framework would let ordinary men commit extraordinary atrocities, not from hatred, from systemic purpose. The greatest nerge in recorded history happened 2 years before Genghis Khan's death. 80,000 riders created a circle spanning 400 miles. It took 7 days to close. The killing lasted 3 more. They counted 600,000 large animals dead, 4 million smaller ones. The numbers grew so large they lost meaning, just like the human tallies would in the cities ahead. But those cities required one more ingredient. The nerge created perfect coordinated killers. It didn't create the speed that made Mongol conquest possible. For that, these horse children would need to learn the doctrine that turned movement into weapon, the secret that let them strike everywhere at once while seeming to be nowhere at all. The messenger collapsed at the Yam station. His horse had covered 90 miles since dawn. The station master already had a fresh mount saddled, no questions asked, no time wasted. The sealed message passed between riders like a baton of death. In 14 seconds, hoofbeats faded into morning mist. The first horse would be dead within the hour. The message would reach its destination in 3 days across 2,000 miles. This was the Mongol secret. Not their bows, not their savagery. speed that shattered every military assumption in existence. European armies crawled at 12 miles per day. Their supply wagons groaned through mud. Their infantry stopped to eat, sleep, argue about pay. The fastest forced marches might achieve 20 miles before men started collapsing. The Mongols sustained 60 miles as standard pace. During emergencies, they doubled it. The mathematics destroyed enemy strategies. A Chinese general calculated his enemy was 5 days away. The Mongols arrived in 2. A Persian Shah positioned armies based on 3 weeks' warning. He got 4 days. Every defensive plan assumed travel times that Mongols cut by 70%. Fortress walls meant nothing when the enemy materialized before scouts returned with warnings. The 4-horse system created this impossibility. Each warrior led multiple mounts on simple rope halters. When one horse tired, he switched mid-gallop. No stopping, no slowing. Fresh legs every 3 hours. The rotation meant each animal worked below exhaustion. European knights rode massive chargers into collapse. Mongols rode smaller horses in mechanical sequence. Individual strength meant less than systematic endurance. The children learned this rhythm before they learned words. Switch horses between breaths. Time the leap when both animals match speed. Miss the timing and fall under 8,000 hooves. The successful ones developed unconscious precision. They could change mounts in full darkness, during storms, while drawing bows. The transition took 3 seconds, less time than a knight needed to adjust his stirrups. Weight mattered more than warriors realized. Mongol saddles weighed 8 pounds against European versions at 40. No armor on horses, no decorative metal. Every excess ounce meant slower movement. The riders themselves carried nothing unnecessary. A coat, a bow, dried meat in saddlebags, water in clean stomachs. Total equipment load under 30 pounds. A European knight's armor alone weighed 60. The Yam network amplified this speed into strategic weapon. Way stations every 25 miles across the empire. Fresh horses waiting. Fresh riders when messages demanded it. Information moved faster than armies. Orders from Karakorum reached Baghdad before local governors knew decisions had been made. The network that carried imperial commands would soon carry intelligence about European defenses. Station masters lived under simple rules. Delay a messenger and die. Let horses rest too long and die. Fail to maintain road markers and die. The punishment seemed extreme until you understood the mathematics. A 12-hour delay in message transmission might mean a 50,000-man army arriving at the wrong position. Speed was everything. Delays were death. The equation allowed no variables. The riders themselves became extensions of this machine. They learned to sleep during mount changes, to digest food while galloping, to read terrain at 30 miles per hour and adjust routes without thinking. Their bodies adapted to constant motion. Stopping felt wrong. Stillness meant vulnerability. The addiction to movement ran deeper than training. It became metabolic necessity. This created tactical advantages beyond mobility. Mongol armies appeared to exist everywhere simultaneously. Strike one position at dawn. Attack another by sunset 50 miles away. Enemies assumed multiple armies operated in coordination. Usually it was one force moving at impossible speed. The psychological impact shattered morale before battles began. How could you fight an enemy that defied physics? Supply lines became obsolete. Why maintain slow wagon trains when you could reach any objective before food ran out? The horses grazed on steppe grass. The riders drank mare's milk and blood. A Mongol army could operate for months without traditional logistics. They moved like wolf packs while enemies moved like loaded merchants. The speed differential meant controlling when and where combat happened. Weather that stopped traditional armies accelerated Mongol movement. Frozen rivers became highways. Snow that trapped infantry let horsemen glide above it. Rain that created mud for wagon wheels meant nothing to units that touched ground only to change direction. European commanders waited for perfect conditions. Mongols attacked during blizzards because no one expected it. The speed doctrine influenced every tactical decision. Why besiege a city for months when you could bypass it and destroy the relief force meant to save it? Why fight where enemies chose when you could strike their capitals before armies mobilized? Traditional warfare assumed predictable movement rates. The Mongols operated outside those assumptions. They fought in the gaps between enemy expectations and reality. Communication at gallop created its own language, hand signals visible at 500 yards, arrow flights that carried coded messages, horse movements that telegraphed intentions to trained observers. Verbal commands became irrelevant at speed. The armies developed sensory vocabulary that functioned faster than speech. A raised bow meant wheel left. A dropped rein meant accelerate. Thousands could coordinate through gesture at velocities that made sound useless. But speed alone had limitations. It could destroy field armies and overrun countryside. It couldn't breach stone walls. The Mongols could appear at any city within days. They couldn't make those cities fall with horse-mounted charges. For 3 generations, this constraint limited expansion to areas without significant fortification, the steppes, the grasslands, the places where mobility meant victory. Genghis Khan understood the mathematics. Every fortified city meant weeks of delay, weeks when enemy kingdoms could unite, when supplies might run short, when the speed advantage disappeared into grinding siege warfare. His armies could reach anywhere. They couldn't necessarily conquer everywhere. The equation needed another variable, the secret to making walls meaningless. The solution came from unexpected sources. Chinese engineers who understood that stone was just another material with breaking points. Persian mathematicians who calculated trajectories for objects no horse could carry. The Mongols would maintain their speed doctrine. They'd simply add technology that moved at the same pace. But first, they needed to convince these specialists to betray their civilizations. The fastest army in history was about to become the most technologically advanced. Speed plus engineering would equal conquest on scales that shouldn't have been possible. Cities that had stood for millennia would fall in days. Because the Mongols were about to discover something that changed warfare forever, velocity itself could become a siege weapon if you understood the science hidden in Chinese libraries. The engineer's hands trembled as he measured gunpowder. Wrong proportions meant death, not from explosion, from the Mongol general watching every movement. The man who'd defended Zhongdu for 3 years now built weapons to destroy cities like his own. His wife and daughters waited in felt tents 2 miles away. Insurance for accurate work. He'd been taken during the siege's final hours. The Mongols sorted survivors with mechanical precision. Farmers to the killing fields, merchants to slavery. But engineers received different treatment. They counted as living weapons, more valuable than gold, more closely guarded than generals. The mathematics were simple. 1 captured engineer equaled 10,000 dead enemies. The Mongols understood technology's value before they understood the technology itself. Genghis Khan collected specialists like other warlords collected concubines, Chinese siege engineers, Muslim mathematicians, Persian architects who knew secrets of undermining walls, Korean metallurgists who could forge unbreakable sword steel. Each conquest added expertise to their growing arsenal. Knowledge flowed one direction, from the conquered to the conquerors. The engineer had watched his colleagues face the choice: collaborate and live, refuse and watch your family fed to horses. Some chose death with honor. Their children's screams changed most minds. The Mongols wasted nothing, not even principled resistance. They'd wait 3 days, show you the sorted piles. Your daughter's in one group, your son's in another, your wife somewhere between. Mathematics made moral. Now he mixed chemicals that would burn underwater. Knowledge gained through generations of Chinese military science. Secrets that apprentices swore to protect. The general didn't care about oaths. He cared about results. Can it breach walls? How many men to operate it? How fast to reload? The questions came without emotion. Tools were tools, whether made of steel or flesh. The collaboration went deeper than forced labor. The Mongols studied everything. Why did Chinese armor use overlapping plates? How did Persian engineers calculate trebuchet trajectories? What made Damascus steel hold its edge? They absorbed innovation like dry earth absorbed blood. No pride prevented learning. No tradition limited adaptation. If enemies used superior methods, those methods became Mongol methods within weeks. The engineer taught them about silk, not for banners or decoration, for survival. Chinese soldiers wore silk undershirts beneath armor. When arrows struck, the silk wrapped around arrowheads without tearing. Surgeons could extract projectiles by gently pulling fabric. The wound channels stayed clean. Infection rates dropped by half. Simple cloth became medical technology. Within months, every Mongol warrior wore silk beneath leather. The material came from Chinese silkworms fed by Chinese slaves supervised by Chinese experts. The irony escaped no one. Defensive innovations meant to stop steppe nomads now protected those same nomads as they destroyed Chinese cities. Technology had no loyalty, only application. The powder weapons changed everything. Chinese fire lances that shot flames 30 feet. Ceramic bombs that shattered into killing fragments. Smoke screens that blinded defenders while attackers scaled walls. The engineer had spent decades perfecting these devices. Now he watched 19-year-old Mongol officers master them in days. They lacked refinement but understood essentials. Point, ignite, kill. Persian engineers contributed different knowledge. Catapults that threw diseased corpses over walls. Siege towers that rolled on Chinese wheels carrying Muslim Greek fire. Battering rams reinforced with Korean steel. Each captured specialist added capabilities. The whole became deadlier than its parts. Mongol mobility, plus Chinese engineering, plus Persian mathematics, equaled conquest without precedent. The systematic absorption had rules. Specialists who held back knowledge disappeared. Their replacements proved more cooperative. The Mongols tested everything through combat. Innovations that worked spread across the army within seasons. Failures meant dead engineers. Natural selection operated on both biology and technology. Only the most effective survived transmission. Some adaptations surprised even creators. The engineer designed a catapult for breaking walls. The Mongols used it to throw burning pitch over rivers, creating flame barriers that trapped fleeing populations. A Persian mathematician calculated angles for longest projectile flight. The Mongols applied his formulas to arrow volleys, turning archery into artillery. Innovation met implementation without bureaucracy's delays. The speed of adaptation terrified defenders. Fortifications that stopped the Mongols in spring fell to new weapons by autumn. European chroniclers wrote about facing demons who wielded supernatural powers. They didn't understand they faced military research compressed into months instead of generations. Each city's defensive innovations became next season's offensive weapons. But the greatest innovation wasn't technological. The Mongols systematized forcing expertise from enemies. They created the world's first military-industrial complex, built on coerced collaboration. A Chinese engineer worked beside a Persian architect overseen by a Muslim mathematician, commanded by an illiterate Mongol who understood only results. The Babel of languages meant nothing. Mathematics was universal. So was fear. The engineer finished mixing his powder. Tomorrow they'd test it against captured wall sections. Success meant his family ate. Failure meant joining the sorted piles. He'd already designed improvements. Longer fuses for safer operation. Ceramic containers that fragmentized more effectively. Innovations that would kill thousands who looked like him, spoke like him, had families like his. He understood the trap's elegance. Refuse and die immediately. Collaborate and die slowly. Watch your knowledge, destroy your civilization. Train your replacements in secrets your guild protected for centuries. The Mongols had industrialized coercion itself, made it efficient, sustainable, scalable. The same systematic approach they'd learned sorting animals in the nerge. The general approved his work with a nod. No praise, no criticism, just acknowledgement that tools functioned adequately. Tomorrow brought new requirements. Weapons that could breach double walls. Fire that burned despite water. Smoke that killed without flame. The engineer would provide solutions. His family depended on it. Everyone's family depended on it. The greatest tragedy wasn't the coercion. It was the improvement. Mongol-driven innovation, advanced military technology, by centuries in decades. The engineer's forced work produced breakthroughs he'd never have achieved in peacetime. Pressure created genius. Terror motivated excellence. The systematic brutality accidentally accelerated human knowledge. Conquest became laboratory. Other engineers shared similar stories around carefully watched fires. The Korean who revealed steel folding techniques to save his village. The Arab who taught naphtha refinement while his brothers' heads decorated spears. The Indian who demonstrated elephant training knowing those elephants would trample Indian armies. Each betrayal perfectly logical. Each collaboration absolutely unforgivable. The Mongols learned something else from their forced experts. Organization mattered more than inspiration. Chinese bureaucracy that seemed suffocating actually enabled massive projects. Persian mathematics that appeared theoretical actually predicted real outcomes. Muslim chemistry that looked like alchemy actually produced consistent results. The nomads absorbed systematic thinking, along with technology. It made them unstoppable. By the time Ögedei Khan inherited his father's empire, the Mongol military included thousands of coerced specialists. Chinese engineers managed siege weapons. Persian architects designed mobile bridges. Arab chemists refined incendiaries. Korean smiths forged specialized arrowheads. The fastest army in history had become the most technically advanced. Speed plus science equaled cities falling like wheat. The engineer returned to his family's tent under guard. His daughters ran to embrace him. Another day survived. Another weapon completed. Another step toward their civilization's destruction by his own hands. Tomorrow he'd teach young Mongol officers to operate devices that took him 20 years to master. He'd watch them reduce profound knowledge to killing efficiency. His wife understood without words. She'd seen other wives whose husbands proved less useful. The careful balance between cooperation and resistance. Too eager meant suspicion. Too reluctant meant death. The engineer walked that line daily, providing exactly enough innovation to seem valuable, holding back just enough to remain necessary. The mathematics of survival through betrayal. Outside, the Mongol camp spread to horizons. 50,000 warriors who moved like wind now commanded weapons that could shatter mountains. The marriage of mobility and technology birthed something unprecedented. Traditional armies couldn't match their speed. Fortified cities couldn't resist their science. The engineer had helped create military perfection through personal catastrophe. Sleep came slowly in the felt tent. His daughter's breathing reminded him why he worked, why he betrayed every oath, why he built weapons for men who'd destroyed everything he'd known. The algebra was simple. His knowledge for their lives, his soul for their survival. The Mongols had industrialized this exchange, made it routine, efficient, horrifying. But even perfect weapons needed perfect application. The Mongols had speed. They had technology. They still needed one more element, the ability to break enemy minds before breaking their bodies. Psychological warfare that would make resistance collapse before physical contact. The engineer didn't know it yet, but his weapons would soon serve strategies darker than simple destruction. The workers vomited into sand already black with blood. 55,000 skulls waited in sorted piles. Large ones here, small ones there. Women and children separated by the size of their empty sockets. The smell hit from a mile away. Sweet rot mixed with limestone dust and the peculiar stench of marrow baking under Asian Sunday. Tamerlane studied the construction with an architect's eye. The foundation needed adjustment. Too wide at the base meant instability at height. He gestured to the Persian engineer. The man understood without words. Start again. Make it narrower. The pyramid must rise perfectly vertical, or the message would be lost. The mathematics of terror required precision. Each skull faced outward. Each jaw opened at the same angle. The engineer had calculated load-bearing ratios. 20 skulls per vertical foot before structural failure. Mortar mixed from local clay and human ash. The binding agent came from the bodies themselves. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. Flies gathered in clouds so thick they blocked sunlight. The workers wrapped cloth around faces, but nothing stopped that smell. It seeped through fabric, invaded pores. The youngest laborers lasted 3 days before collapsing. Older ones had learned to breathe through mouths, to focus on technical problems instead of what they handled. The sorting took patience Tamerlane had perfected through decades. Warriors' skulls bore different damage than farmers. Sword cuts left clean edges. Agricultural tools created messier wounds. He wanted viewers to read the story. Here fought men who resisted. Here died women who surrendered. Here lay children who never had the choice. Isfahan had made that choice 3 days ago. Surrender immediately or feed the monument. The city elders debated while Tamerlane's men sharpened blades. Pride spoke louder than survival. The gates stayed closed. The siege lasted 14 hours. The killing took 70 more. Now their skulls became architecture. The first pyramid rose beside the main road. Travelers would pass it for centuries. Merchants would count layers while calculating safe distances to make camp. The monument would outlast the city it came from. Isfahan would rebuild. The pyramid would remain. Mathematics made permanent. The Persian engineer had built bridges and palaces. Now he stacked calcium and memory into vertical warnings. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. This one's eye sockets aligned incorrectly. That one's fracture would cause structural weakness. Replace them. The pyramid must stand perfect. His family waited in the Mongol camp. Their survival measured in architectural precision. Tamerlane had studied Mongol methods. Genghis Khan killed efficiently but left no monuments. Bodies rotted. Memory faded. Fear required refreshing each generation. But skulls lasted. Pyramids endured. A child born 30 years later would still see consequences made calcium, would still smell death in drought winds, would calculate odds differently. The innovation came from synthesis. Mongol speed plus Persian architecture plus human psychology. Strike fast, kill completely, build monuments, move to next city. The formula compressed terror into sustainable form. Previous conquerors wasted their victories on temporary displays. Tamerlane made his permanent. By the second day, the pyramid reached 20 feet. The workers developed systems. One team cleaned skulls, another sorted by size, a third applied mortar, the fourth positioned each piece. Industrial efficiency applied to mass death. The same systematic approach that built cathedrals. Different materials. Same precision. Birds wouldn't approach within 500 yards. Horses required blindfolds to pass. Even battle-hardened warriors avoided looking directly at construction. The wrongness went beyond visual. Something in human brain stems recognized the violation. These shapes should be people, not building materials. The disconnect created nausea deeper than smell. The engineer calculated they'd need 3 more days, weather permitting. The rains would slow mortar drying. Wind might topple scaffolding. He factored variables like any construction project. Load limits, settling rates, expansion coefficients. The mathematics stayed consistent whether building from stone or bone. Local villages sent food for workers, not charity. Terror. They'd seen what happened to those who withheld supplies. The bread tasted of ash. The water carried metallic hints. Everything near the pyramids absorbed wrongness. Farmers would abandon these fields. Trade routes would shift. The economic impact would last generations. Tamerlane approved the progress with minimal words. Higher, narrower, more visible from the road. He understood propaganda before the word existed. These weren't just monuments. They were transmission systems. Every merchant who passed would carry stories. Every story would grow in telling. By the time tales reached distant cities, the pyramids would be mountain high, made from millions, visible from impossible distances. The reality was sufficient. 43 feet at completion, 8,000 skulls per face, 4 faces total. The morning sun would catch the eye sockets first. Evening light would throw shadows through jawbones. Rain would pool in craniums. Wind would whistle through gaps. The monument would live its own existence, speaking without words. The flies evolved their own ecosystem. Larvae in marrow spaces, beetles in nasal cavities, a vertical city of decay supporting its own food chains. The engineer hadn't calculated for this. How insect weight might affect stability, how gases from decomposition might create pressure. He adjusted plans accordingly. Drainage channels, ventilation gaps. Even monuments of death required maintenance. Workers closest to completion showed 1,000-yard stairs, They'd handled too much calcium that used to think. Their dreams filled with empty sockets. Some went mad in quiet ways, forgetting names, losing language. As if proximity to that much death dissolved individual identity, they became extensions of the monument, living components in its construction. Other cities sent ambassadors to witness. Tamerlane encouraged this. Let them see precision, count skulls, calculate their own populations. The mathematics would speak louder than threats. Isfahan had 70,000 residents. 55,000 became building material. The ratio was intentional. Leave just enough alive to spread word, kill enough to make monuments. The ambassador from Herat couldn't stop trembling. He counted layers obsessively, calculated volume, estimated weight. His city had similar populations, similar walls, similar pride. He'd return with numbers that would echo through council chambers. 72 hours from resistance to pyramid. The efficiency defied comprehension. Some skulls still carried hair, black strands that moved in wind like the living. Children's skulls nested inside adult ones for stability. Families unified in architecture. The engineer had suggested this modification. Better load distribution, improved weather resistance. He'd learned to think like Tamerlane, to see humans as engineering problems requiring solutions. The monument's shadow grew daily, first covering the road, then reaching cultivated fields, finally touching the city's ruined walls. Isfahan's survivors watched their neighbors become landmarks. Some tried to identify relatives by skull shape. Most gave up. Identity meant nothing in calcium. The pyramid was statement, not cemetery. By completion, the smell had penetrated everything. Clothing, skin. The workers would carry it for months, mark them as monument builders. No amount of washing removed that particular stench. It went deeper than surface, into souls. The smell of transformation, of humans become architecture, of mathematics made from bone. Tamerlane ordered 3 more pyramids at cardinal points, north, south, east. The western approach would stay clear. Let travelers choose. Approach past monuments or circle through wastes. Most chose wastes. The psychological radius exceeded visual range. Stories spread faster than armies. Cities heard about pyramids before they saw Mongol banners. The Persian engineer received payment in survival. His family would travel with the army, build more monuments, perfect the ratios. He'd become specialist in mankind's strangest architecture. The only builder who measured success in screams per square foot, in nightmares per vertical yard. His knowledge would outlive him, transmitted to apprentices who'd build pyramids across continents. Workers dismantled scaffolding as sun set. The pyramid stood complete, perfect, terrible, functional. Morning would bring its first test. How many would surrender just seeing it? The mathematics of fear made physical. Calcium transformed into psychological weapon. The files recorded numbers, not names. Skulls sorted by size, not identity. The same systematic approach as the nerge. But where the hunt used death for sustenance, pyramids used death for communication. Both reduced life to units. Both achieved efficiency through systematic process. The monument stood as evolution of method. Tamerlane had one more innovation. Prisoners would maintain the pyramids, replace collapsed sections, clear vegetation, polish surfaces, living humans tending monuments of death. The job would drive them mad. That madness would spread. Stories of caretakers who spoke to skulls, who heard responses, who gradually forgot which side of the monument they belonged to. Stars emerged as workers departed. The pyramid caught moonlight, white calcium glowing against dark earth, visible for miles. A lighthouse of different purpose, warning instead of welcoming. The geometry perfect, the message clear, the mathematics absolute. But the truest terror wasn't in the monuments themselves. Other conquerors built with enemy skulls, made cups from craniums, decorated with death. Tamerlane's innovation was industrializing the process, making it reproducible, sustainable, a formula any lieutenant could follow. The pyramids weren't just monuments, they were manuals. The final skull placed was a child's, small, delicate, position calculated for structural necessity. The engineer felt nothing as he mortared it. Feeling had been sorted away like everything else. He'd learned the Mongol lesson. Emotion decreased efficiency. Sentiment was luxury. Results were everything. Morning brought the first test. A trade caravan approached from the east. The lead merchant saw white geometry against sunrise. Distance made it seem decorative. Closer approach revealed truth. The caravan stopped 2 miles away. Waited 3 hours. Turned back. Word would spread along trade routes. The pyramid had begun its work. Some cities surrendered just hearing descriptions. Mathematics made the choice simple. Resist and become monument. Submit and merely lose freedom. The pyramids changed warfare's calculus. Made resistance actively irrational. Why die for principles when your skull would argue against those same principles forever? The logic was horrible, inescapable, effective. The Persian engineer packed his tools. Tomorrow brought another city, another pyramid, another 43 feet of calcium arguments. He'd perfected the ratios, could calculate skull requirements from population estimates, could predict structural integrity from bone density, had become artist of humanity's strangest medium. But pyramids were just visible symptoms. The deeper innovation was psychological, making death productive, transforming massacre into message, converting calcium into communication. The same systematic thinking that created Mongol warriors from steppe children applied to architecture, to propaganda, to fear itself. Tamerlane studied his monument one last time. Perfect vertical lines, precise spacing, mathematical beauty in biological materials, the fusion of Mongol efficiency with Persian aesthetics, of Chinese system thinking with Arab precision. The pyramid stood as culmination of conquered knowledge. Each skull had lived under different kings. Now they shared one purpose, warning others about the price of resistance. The monument would outlast its builders, would speak its calcium message to generations unborn. Some would call it barbarism, others would recognize genius. The systematic transformation of massacre into communication, of death into data, of humans into headlines written in bone. The files wouldn't spread as fast as stories, but they'd spread farther. The mathematics of monument construction, ratios and recipes, how to sort efficiently, how to stack stability, how to create propaganda from corpses. The knowledge would travel trade routes, would reach students who'd improve methods, would evolve like everything the Mongols touched. 100 cities would see pyramids. Most would surrender before construction began. The monuments worked best as threats, as mathematics explained to city elders. Your population equals this many skulls. This many skulls builds this height pyramid. Choose. The algebra of annihilation made visible. But even perfect terror had limits. Even systematized fear found resistance. Some cities would calculate differently, would choose death over dishonor, would make the Mongols work for their monuments. These battles would be different, desperate, magnificent, doomed. The pyramid stood complete as stars multiplied above. 8,000 empty sockets per face catching night wind, creating sounds like whispered calculations. The monument had found its voice, would speak its warning until weather and time dissolved calcium back to dust. But by then, 10,000 more would stand across continents. The method had been proven, the formula established. Some cities surrendered just hearing about these pyramids. The messenger dropped from his saddle at noon. His legs buckled after riding through darkness. The station master caught the leather pouch before it hit dirt. Fresh horse, already saddled. New rider mounted before the first finished falling. Hoofbeats faded into dust clouds. The system allowed no delays. This message carried different weight. Not battle orders, not supply requests. Intelligence about stone walls and iron gates. About cities that thought themselves safe behind fortifications. The Mongols had speed and terror. They lacked one element. How to make walls meaningless when horses couldn't leap stone. The intelligence network stretched across conquered territories like spider silk. Invisible, everywhere. Mongol riders posed as merchants. Chinese defectors counted garrison strengths. Persian traders mapped city layouts. Every conversation overheard, every weakness catalogued. Information moved faster than armies because information was the army's eyes. Station masters memorized faces without names. This courier rode the Beijing route. That one carried Damascus intelligence. Messages coded in knot patterns, only commanders understood. The riders themselves couldn't read what they carried. Knowledge stayed compartmentalized. Even under torture, a captured messenger revealed nothing but rope patterns. The network learned to value different intelligence. European spies counted soldiers. Mongols counted wells. How many water sources inside walls? How deep were grain stores? How many blacksmiths to repair weapons? The mathematics of siege work, written in mundane details. A city might hide soldier numbers. They couldn't hide how much bread their ovens produced. Merchants proved the best sources. They entered cities openly, counted everything from habit. A silk trader from Bukhara might mention Damascus had 40,000 residents. The Mongols heard 40,000 skulls. The merchant noted 3 granaries. The Mongols calculated 3 weeks before starvation. Every commercial observation became military intelligence. The station master watched the fresh rider disappear. Another would arrive within hours. The network never slept. Messages flowed like blood through imperial veins, from scout to station to commander. The speed made coordination possible across impossible distances. Armies could strike simultaneously, 1,000 miles apart, because information synchronized their movements. Local populations learned to fear the stations more than armies. Soldiers passed through. The intelligence network remained, watching, counting, recording. A farmer complaining about taxes might doom his village. A merchant bragging about city wealth guaranteed its destruction. Words became weapons in ways speakers never intended. The Mongols recruited intelligencers through standard methods. Collaboration or death. But intelligence work offered better terms than engineering. Spies kept their families, earned gold, gained protection. The work required subtlety the Mongols couldn't provide themselves. They needed local knowledge, cultural understanding, the ability to pass unnoticed, skills that came from birth, not training. A Persian spy named Hassan wrote the manual, not officially. Nothing survived on paper, but his methods spread through whispered instruction: how to count fortifications without seeming interested, how to map gates during casual walks, how to identify which commanders drank, which feared their own men, which would fight, which would negotiate. Intelligence as precise as arrow flights. The network identified more than military targets. They found engineers before cities fell, located grain stores before sieges started, identified which nobles had gold hidden, which priests would collaborate. The sorting began through intelligence. By the time armies arrived, they knew exactly who lived where, who had value, who would feed horses. Station masters developed their own language. A blue banner meant urgent military intelligence. Red indicated economic information. Yellow warned of plague or disaster. The combinations created complex messages visible 5 miles away. Riders adjusted routes based on colors glimpsed at distance. The visual system moved faster than any written code. But the greatest intelligence coup came from an unexpected source. A Chinese engineer defecting not for survival but for revenge. His city had executed his father for incomplete walls. He carried plans, not just for one fortress, for the entire Chinese defensive system. Every weakness, every design flaw, generations of military secrets in one bitter mind. The intelligence value exceeded any treasure. The Mongols learned that Chinese walls followed patterns, strong against frontal assault, vulnerable to corner pressure, gates reinforced with iron but hinges made from wood. Burn the wood, the iron fell. Details that turned impregnable fortresses into puzzles with solutions. More defectors followed, each carrying pieces of defensive knowledge. The Mongols assembled intelligence like they assembled armies, systematically, completely. A Muslim architect revealed that Persian walls used specific mortar vulnerable to vinegar. A Hungarian engineer explained how European castles channeled attackers into killing zones. Every defensive innovation catalogued, countered, defeated before armies arrived. The station master received another rider as sun peaked. This one bore fresh wounds. Message delivered through pursuit. The intelligence must have exceptional value to risk injured couriers. The system had protocols. Wounded messengers received priority. Their information might die with them. The next station stood 40 miles distant. The rider would make it, or die trying. The message would continue regardless. Cities learned to fear Mongol intelligence more than Mongol arrows. Spies meant your defenses were already compromised, your weaknesses mapped, your leaders evaluated. The psychological impact often exceeded military threat. Knowing enemies possessed your secrets made resistance feel futile. Why fight when they already knew how you'd lose? The network evolved its own ethics. Spies who provided false information disappeared with their families, but accurate intelligence earned rewards beyond gold. Safety for relatives, education for children, even positions of authority in conquered territories. The Mongols understood motivation better than most employers. Fear started cooperation. Reward sustained it. A merchant arriving at Damascus gates didn't know his cargo included coded messages. Silk bolts carried knot patterns in their binding. Spice bags held weight variations that spelled intelligence. The merchant himself stayed ignorant. If questioned, his confusion was genuine. The network used unwitting carriers, safer than conscious agents, more believable under interrogation. Station masters memorized impossible details. Which riders used which routes, when messages passed through, the human database that made the network function. They lived isolated lives, no families, no friends, no connections that enemies might exploit. They existed as mechanical components in the intelligence machine, input messages, output directions, nothing more. The wounded rider had fallen 2 stations back. His replacement carried the message now. Still 30 miles to destination, the information moved even as its carriers died. The system's redundancy ensured critical intelligence survived individual failure. Like everything Mongol, efficiency mattered more than components. Hassan the Persian developed intelligence pyramids, not physical ones, organizational structures that compartmentalized knowledge. Field agents knew only their targets. Regional coordinators saw patterns but not purposes. Only senior commanders understood complete pictures. The pyramid protected against betrayal. Capture one level and the rest survived. The network's greatest success came from patience. Mongol armies struck like lightning. Their intelligence gathering moved like seasons. Agents spent years establishing credibility, building merchant relationships, earning local trust. The investment paid during conquest. Cities fell to information gathered decades before attacks began. A Chinese spy reported something extraordinary. European kingdoms barely knew Mongols existed. Their maps showed empty steppes where the empire thrived. Their merchants avoided eastern routes. Their armies prepared for different threats. The intelligence gap meant Europe remained blind, while Mongol scouts already mapped their cities. The station master noted the day's traffic. 17 messengers, 3 wounded, 2 dead on arrival. Messages continued through all. The arithmetic of intelligence written in exhausted horses and dying men. But the information they carried would save 10,000 lives through better battle planning. The mathematics justified the cost. Local governors tried breaking the network, executed suspected spies, tortured merchants, closed trade routes. Nothing worked. The system adapted like water finding cracks. New agents, different routes, alternative methods. The intelligence flowed regardless. Trying to stop it only revealed which officials posed threats. They disappeared first when armies arrived. The Mongols learned to correlate intelligence types. Economic data predicted military capacity. Social information revealed defensive will. Religious intelligence indicated resistance levels. The patterns emerged through systematic collection. Cities with strong merchant classes negotiated. Those with powerful priests fought harder. The data let commanders adjust tactics before arrival. By sunset, the wounded messenger's information reached its destination. Details about Hungarian fortifications. Castle designs unlike anything in Asia. Stone construction that Chinese methods couldn't breach. New problems requiring new solutions. The intelligence network had found the puzzle. Engineers would provide answers. Station masters changed shifts without ceremony. The new man memorized pending messages, counted fresh horses, checked banner supplies. The work continued through darkness, through seasons, through conquest and retreat. The network that carried intelligence about European walls would outlast the empire itself. A final rider arrived carrying unusual cargo. Not messages, but maps, detailed drawings of Vienna's fortifications, gate positions, wall heights, guard rotations, water sources. Everything an attacker needed. The intelligence had taken 2 years to gather, cost 14 agents' lives. The information would prove invaluable if the armies reached Vienna. The station master didn't know about Ögedei's drinking, didn't understand that perfect intelligence meant nothing if commanders couldn't act on it. The network had done its job, located every weakness, mapped every defense, counted every soldier. The information existed. Whether armies could use it depended on factors beyond any spy's control. But networks like this left legacies beyond single campaigns. The methods spread, the techniques evolved. Future empires would build their own intelligence systems based on Mongol innovations. The systematic gathering of information, the patient cultivation of sources, the mathematical analysis of enemy capacity, all traced back to station masters counting messages in desert darkness. By 1241, their intelligence network stretched from China to Hungary's borders, every major city catalogued, every fortress mapped, every weakness documented. The greatest intelligence apparatus in medieval history stood ready. All it needed was armies to act on its information. The messengers kept riding, unaware their Khan lay dying in his tent. Information flowed toward a future that would never arrive. The Battle of Mohi began with morning fog so thick that Hungarian knights couldn't see their own horses' heads. King Bela stood in golden armor worth more than most villages. His nobles wore silk beneath chainmail. Peasant levies shivered in wool tunics, gripping farming tools resharpened for war. 40,000 men arranged by birth instead of skill. The Mongols would kill them all with equal efficiency. Subutai studied the Hungarian camp from a hillside 2 miles distant. His scouts counted banners, noble families displaying centuries of heraldry. Each flag represented bloodlines stretching to Charlemagne. The old general calculated differently. Banners meant static command structures, rigid hierarchies, men who'd argue about precedence while dying. The Hungarian army had camped exactly where Subutai wanted. Sajo River to their backs, swamp to their left, forest blocking retreat routes. They'd chosen the ground for its defensive appearance, strong position for traditional warfare, perfect killing box for Mongol mathematics. The nobles felt secure behind their wagon fortress. They'd learn about security when escape routes closed. Bela's war council had debated through the night. Duke Frederick wanted immediate attack. Archbishop Ugrin demanded they wait for reinforcements. Count Matthias insisted on defending the wagon line. Each man commanded troops who'd follow only their direct lord. The fractured command would cost 25,000 lives. Democracy in warfare meant death in arithmetic. The fog had come like answered prayers. Mongol shamans claimed credit, but weather patterns created opportunity. Batu Khan ordered complete silence. 50,000 horses wrapped hooves in felt. Warriors communicated through touch alone. The greatest cavalry force on earth moved like mist through mist. By the time Hungarians noticed, positioning was complete. A Croatian mercenary noticed first. Shadows in fog that moved wrong. Shapes that suggested horses but flowed like water. He tried warning his Hungarian commander. The man laughed. Mongols were raiders. Bandits. They'd never dare attack a proper Christian army. The Croatian had fought Turks. He recognized disciplined death when it approached. His warning went unheeded. The first arrows came with dawn light. Not volleys. Probes. Testing range. Measuring response. Hungarian crossbowmen fired back at shadows. Wasted bolts on fog phantoms. The Mongols counted reload times. Noted defensive positions. Calculated angles. The geometry of slaughter drawn in morning mist. Archbishop Ugrin blessed his men in Latin, promised heaven for those who fell fighting pagans. His congregation included Magyar nobles who traced lineage to Arpad, German knights seeking glory, Serbian mercenaries fighting for coin, peasants conscripted from fields they'd never see again. The blessing unified them momentarily. Death would democratize them permanently. Subutai gave no speeches. His commanders knew their roles through decades of campaigns. The plan required no explanation. Pin the enemy against the river, block the bridge, create panic through encirclement, let trapped animals exhaust themselves, then feed horses. Simple, repeatable, effective. The Hungarian nobles arranged themselves by rank. Duke Frederick's men held the right wing because his title predated Count Matthias by 2 generations. Baron Laszlo commanded the centre through marriage connections. Military skill meant less than bloodline. The Mongols arranged by function, horse archers on flanks, heavy cavalry hidden in reserve, engineers with Chinese fire weapons waiting, merit deployment against birthright positioning. When full attack came, it shattered precedent. Mongol light cavalry struck simultaneously from 3 directions. No single massive charge, no heroic clash. Just calculated pressure applied like water finding weakness. The Hungarian formation held initially, discipline maintained by centuries of tradition. Then the fire weapons spoke. Chinese bombs exploded between wagon lines, not to destroy, to terrify. Horses bred for tournaments had never heard such sounds. They screamed, reared, broke formation. Noble knights fought their own mounts while arrows fell like rain. The democracy of panic began. Duke and peasant equally helpless against animals gone mad. A Hungarian chronicle recorded what happened next through tears. The witness was 16, a page to Baron Laszlo. He watched his master try to rally troops. The Baron's voice drowned in mechanical death. Mongol units wheeled and fired in perfect sequence. No individual heroes, no single combat, just systematic reduction of living to dead. The peasant levies broke first. They'd come to war with scythes and hope. Neither helped against coordinated arrows. They ran toward the bridge, found it blocked by Mongol heavy cavalry who'd crossed downstream during fog. The trap complete, the killing mathematical. Duke Frederick tried leading a charge, gathered 200 knights in iron and pride. They lowered lances, sang battle hymns, thundered toward Mongol lines that melted away like morning mist. The knights pursued, didn't notice flanking movements, didn't see the encirclement forming. When they tried returning, escape routes had closed. 200 nobles worth kingdoms in ransom died in a ditch. Their peasant servants died beside them. Democracy through death. The Chinese engineer manning fire weapons noted the screams came in every language. Hungarian commands, Latin prayers, German curses, Serbian pleas, all reduced to animal sounds by systematic pressure. He designed these weapons to break walls. They broke minds faster. A duke's courage meant nothing when his eyes melted. A peasant's fear meant nothing when lungs filled with smoke. Equal opportunity, annihilation. King Bela watched his army dissolve. Not defeated, dissolved, like salt in water. Units that had drilled for years forgot their training. Nobles abandoned their oaths. Peasants dropped weapons that had taken months to forge. The Mongol pressure never ceased, never peaked, just steady, relentless, calculated. The archbishop tried rallying troops around his banner, the cross that had inspired crusades, that had blessed coronations. Mongol arrows cared nothing for symbolism. Ugrin fell with 17 shafts in his body. His knights fell trying to protect the corpse. His peasant followers fell because they had nowhere else to go. The banner trampled into mud that mixed all blood equally. By noon, the Hungarian army existed only in pockets. Groups of men pressed together by terror. Some still fought. Most just died. The Mongols had perfected this phase. Systematic reduction of pockets. No mercy, no negotiation, no pause. Count Matthias offered his entire treasury for safe passage. The Mongol commander didn't understand the words, didn't care. Nobles had no special value. Death was death. A Serbian mercenary left the only coherent account of the democracy. He'd hidden beneath corpses, watched Mongol units work with industrial precision, They sorted the dead, while killing continued. Stripping armor from nobles, weapons from soldiers, clothes from peasants. Everything had value except the lives. Duke and farmer stacked together, count and serf united in death piles. Birth meant nothing to men who measured only efficiency. The killing lasted until sunset. The counting lasted 3 days. Mongol scribes tallied with characteristic precision. 10,000 nobles, 15,000 professional soldiers, 20,000 peasant levies. The categories mattered only for intelligence purposes. Future armies would have different compositions. The data improved targeting. The corpses rotted without discrimination. King Bela escaped through marshes. His golden armor abandoned. His royal dignity dissolved in swamp water. He lived because a peasant fisherman knew paths the Mongols hadn't mapped. The King of Hungary owed his life to a man whose name history forgot. Another form of democracy. Survival made equal by circumstance. The battlefield aftermath defied European understanding. No ransoms collected, no bodies returned for Christian burial. Mongol units had already moved toward Pest. Left behind only stripped corpses and traumatized survivors. The democratic slaughter complete. Witnesses would spread word. Hungary's greatest army reduced to meat. Noble and common blood mixing in the same mud. The Chinese engineer packed his fire weapons. Tomorrow brought new targets. The formulas had worked perfectly. Panic multiplied by fire equaled victory. Social hierarchy meant nothing to chemistry. Duke and peasant burned at the same temperature. He'd learned to find satisfaction in technical success, in clean function, in problems solved regardless of human cost. Subutai reviewed casualty figures by firelight. 43 Mongol dead, 200 wounded, against 45,000 enemy eliminated. The ratio pleased him, better than Chinese campaigns. European armor slowed them, made targeting easier. Their formation fighting made encirclement simple. He made notes for future battles, adjustments to improve efficiency. A Hungarian survivor wrote years later about the sound. Not battle cries or death screams. The whistle of arrows, continuous, mechanical, like rain that killed. He'd been a baron's son. Watched servants die protecting him. Saw his status mean nothing to arrows. Learned democracy through Mongol mathematics. Noble blood and peasant blood looked identical in mud. The carrion birds came at dawn. They didn't distinguish between duke and farmer. The feast was democratic. Crows pulled eyes from nobles and commoners alike. Wolves gnawed on bones without checking pedigree. Nature understood what Mongol arithmetic taught. Death was the ultimate equality. Batu Khan had already forgotten Mohi. His scouts reported on Pest, on Gran, on cities that still believed walls meant safety. The Hungarian army had been an obstacle, now removed. The systematic conquest would continue. Each city would learn the same lesson. Mongol mathematics recognized no social distinction, only living and dead. The conversion between categories happened with equal efficiency regardless of birth. The Battle of Mohi entered history as Europe's greatest medieval defeat. Chroniclers focused on noble deaths, on kingdoms shattered, on bloodlines ended. They missed the deeper horror. The democracy of it. How Mongol systems reduced centuries of social hierarchy to identical corpses. How birth and titles and glory meant nothing to men who counted only efficiency. But the greatest democracy was yet to come, because while Mongol armies erased European distinctions through death, their own Khan was discovering equality of a different kind. The mathematics that made nobles and peasants equal in mud would soon make conqueror and conquered equal before biology. Ögedei Khan's liver didn't care about his titles. Europe lay defenseless, and then their Khan reached for another drink. The most disciplined military system in history was about to learn that wine recognized no rank. The quote came from a different war, centuries later, but Dwight Eisenhower captured something the Mongols knew in their bones. I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can, only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, its stupidity. The warriors who perfected killing understood its horror better than anyone. Subutai had counted more corpses than any living man. The general who orchestrated Mohi sat alone after victories. No celebration, no satisfaction, just tallying numbers that grew meaningless through repetition. 100,000 at Kiev, 45,000 at Mohi, 2 million across the Jin campaigns. The arithmetic of annihilation became mundane as grain counts. The veterans showed it in their eyes. Not the 1,000-yard stare of trauma, something else. The look of men who'd discovered killing's banality. Who'd learned that ending life required no hatred, no passion, no meaning. Just mechanical function. Draw bow. Release. Next. Target. The same motions whether hunting rabbits or erasing civilizations. A Chinese chronicler captured this paradox watching Mongol officers. They discussed massacre logistics like farmers planning harvests. No excitement, no revulsion. Professional killers who'd moved beyond both. The work was work. Cities fell or didn't. Populations died or surrendered. Tomorrow brought identical choices with different names. The young warriors came to war expecting glory. They found production quotas instead. First battle might bring excitement, terror, some perverse thrill. By the 10th city, it was routine. By the 100th, just labor. The systematization that made them unstoppable also stripped meaning from victory. What satisfaction came from inevitable outcomes? Tolui had confessed this to his brother Ögedei during rare honest moments. The youngest son of Genghis Khan commanded armies that dissolved kingdoms, yet he drank himself unconscious most nights. Not celebrating, forgetting. The weight of calculated death pressed heavier than any armor. He understood what they'd become. Perfect killers who'd lost the ability to be anything else. The contradiction ran deeper than individual souls. Mongol society produced ultimate warriors through systematic brutalization. Children named not human, trained to see others as less than human. Boys who counted corpses before they counted years. The process worked. Created soldiers of impossible efficiency. Also created men who could never return to normal existence. A Mongol warrior captured at Legnica tried explaining to his Polish captors. They expected barbarian ravings, found philosophy instead. He spoke about the burden of competence, how perfecting death as craft meant carrying it forever. His unit had killed 8,000 at Liegnitz. He remembered none as individuals. They'd become units of work completed. The Poles thought him mad. He was perfectly sane. The nerge taught this lesson early. Surround, compress, slaughter, process. The mechanics identical whether killing deer or humans. But deer didn't plead in languages you learned to ignore. Didn't offer treasures that meant nothing to men who measured only efficiency. Didn't remind you of your own children while dying. The systematic training created systematic blindness, essential for function, corrosive to souls. Veterans developed shared characteristics. The efficiency that won battles destroyed peace. They'd eat mechanically, sleep in shifts from habit, calculate resources reflexively. A Mongol general visiting Chinese courts unnerved diplomats by counting servants, measuring doorways, noting defensive weaknesses. He couldn't stop. The programming ran too deep. The suicides came quietly. Warriors who'd survived impossible campaigns hanging themselves in their jers. No explanation, no note. Just men who'd perfected death finally applying that knowledge personally. The shamans blamed evil spirits. The officers knew better. Some loads broke carriers eventually. Some knowledge couldn't be unlearned. Genghis Khan himself had understood this. His famous quote about greatest pleasure being victory over enemies contained deeper truth. He'd found the only meaning that sustained such existence. Keep moving. Keep conquering. Keep the machinery of war grinding forward. Because stopping meant confronting what you'd become. The creator of the system, trapped within it. The Chinese engineer who'd built their siege weapons wrote about Mongol drinking. Not celebration drinking. Obliteration drinking. Men trying to drown memories that floated like corpses. The most disciplined soldiers on earth lost all restraint with alcohol. Because discipline was the cage. Drunkenness offered momentary escape from mechanical precision. Some warriors tried returning to traditional life. Herding, trading, the simple existence they'd known before conscription. It never worked. They'd calculate how many arrows it would take to eliminate their own families. Plan defensive positions while watching children play. The training went bone deep. Peace became foreign country they could visit but never inhabit. A Persian physician treating wounded Mongols noted their strangest injury, not physical, something in their ability to feel. They'd describe horrific wounds with technical detail but no emotional content. Discuss dead comrades as numerical losses. The same systematization that let them function in battle had systematically stripped away human responses. They'd engineered emotions out of themselves. The interpreter at Mohi had watched Subutai after victory. The general who'd orchestrated perfect slaughter stood examining corpses, not gloating, studying, looking for ways to improve efficiency. Where arrows had wasted penetration, where positioning could have compressed killing zones, a master craftsman critiquing his work. The horror lay in such detachment. In treating massacre as technical exercise requiring refinement, Mongol warriors aged differently than other soldiers, not just physically, something in their expressions, like men who'd seen behind reality's curtain and found machinery. They'd learned truths about human fragility, about how easily civilization dissolved, about how little separated order from slaughter. The knowledge showed in every interaction. Children fled when veteran units passed through villages, not from fear of violence, from something else. The absence where humanity should be. These weren't evil men. Evil required passion. They were something worse. Men engineered into perfect function, who'd traded souls for efficiency, who'd discovered the price only after payment was complete. The shamans tried healing rituals, prayers to restore what combat had taken. Nothing worked. The transformation was permanent as scarring. Some veterans found peace in teaching, passing knowledge to next generations. Others simply endured, carrying mechanical death through mechanical days, waiting for biology to complete what enemies couldn't. A Korean merchant described negotiating with Mongol officers. Their strangest demand wasn't gold or goods. They wanted wine, massive quantities, more than armies could drink. He thought they celebrated constantly, later learned the truth. They were medicating, trying to blur edges of too sharp awareness, to feel something besides professional assessment of everything as potential target. The system had succeeded too well, created warriors superior to any in history, also created men who could never be anything but warriors. The training that began with children on horses ended with adults who'd forgotten any other existence. They'd perfected the craft of death, been perfected by it in return. This was Mongol tragedy. Not their brutality, their success. They'd solved warfare's mathematical problems, reduced combat to engineering, transformed killing into science. The victories were inevitable once the formula was perfected, but the formula transformed its practitioners into components of itself, human weapons who could never be human again. A Hungarian survivor wrote about capturing a Mongol warrior. They expected savage pleasure in killing, found exhausted professionalism instead. The man explained their system like describing agriculture. Plant arrows in bodies, harvest territory. Simple, repeatable, effective. He showed no pride, no shame, no emotion at all, just tired expertise in humanity's darkest craft. The final paradox was perfection itself. Other armies produced warriors who enjoyed killing, who found meaning in violence. The Mongols had engineered past such crude motivations, created soldiers who killed without pleasure or hatred, who performed massacre as function, who discovered that systematizing death meant becoming systems themselves, organic components in history's most efficient killing machine. Which brings us back to that December night in 1241. Night pressed against the felt walls while servants lifted another cup to cracked lips. Breath came in ragged pulls that rattled the brazier ash. The cup trembled, spilled, stained silk dark as storm water. A general stood in the doorway and didn't blink. He heard horses shifting outside, and heard the quiet that followed a lifetime of motion. The last swallow tasted sweet and sour, and final. A physician reached for his wrist and stopped himself. Shamans muttered low songs that couldn't find a rhythm with those laboured breaths. The tent smelled of wine, and horse sweat, and fear that no one dared name. The most disciplined men on earth waited without commands. Even hooves outside moved softer, as if the animals understood the balance of the world hung in that dim space. and a rider already tightened girths for the sprint none of them wanted to make. Ögedei reached for air and found nothing. Fingers scraped silk, eyes clouded like winter rivers. The man who drove armies faster than thought could not outpace his own heart. Silk rustled, a cup rolled. The body that had outlasted blizzards yielded to fermented milk and Chinese wine. Silence swallowed the tent, and then a whisper slipped past the flap. The whisper carried farther than any war cry ever would. A commander stepped out into frost and spoke one word to his aide. Riders saddled fresh mounts at the edge of the camp. Blue banners at the nearest station snapped awake before dawn. The network that slid messages across continents began to hum like a hive. Hoofbeats thudded into frozen ground and carried the order toward every horizon at once. The first horse died before noon. A second carried the word another 30 miles. Stations lit fires for speed drills. Grooms shoved bowls of warm milk into messengers' hands and yanked them away before lips touched. The pouches changed hands without greetings. Knots told the story. All lines of command pulled tight. Princes broke camp. Quartermasters packed siege tools with hands that didn't shake, because training had removed shaking long ago. And generals stared at Vienna as if it had vanished in mist. European nobles feasted in heavy halls. They tipped cups. They told stories about victories that hadn't happened yet. Wind pushed snow against shutters while riders in felt boots slammed across river ice. No one in those halls smelled the sweat of terrified horses. No one heard the thunder rolling away from their borders. The dead man's decision, carved by drink, reached their enemies before dawn on the third day. The men in fur-trimmed cloaks remained blessedly ignorant. Batu's officers read the knots by torchlight. Subotai traced lines on crude maps and stopped his finger short of the Danube. Orders outranked momentum. The system obeyed itself. Engineers folded ladders. Fire teams sealed their jars. Scouts quit counting European granaries and started counting river crossings eastward. The machine that perfected conquest pivoted in hours. Even the crows near Pest lifted and wheeled without knowing why. The retreat did not stumble. It flowed. Rear guards set false camps and left fires burning. The same doctrine that crushed armies now guarded the withdrawal. Silence rode ahead of them. Speed rode with them. The Yam carried new instructions to flanking wings that had ranged out like wolf packs. A continent braced for ruin, and never learned how close that ruin came. The hoofbeats faded like the end of a storm. Back in the silent tent, attendants wrapped a body in felt. No wails broke the ritual. Stiff hands folded. The empire's rhythm did not break. It shifted. Men who counted corpses without flinching now drank in long pulls that burned their throats clean. They had work. They had distances to cross. They had a dead Khan and a living order. Europe exhaled without knowing it held its breath. Snow crusted on horse manes as the army turned east. Messengers rode night and day with no past and no names. Blue flags flashed at stations every 25 miles, and the machine ate ground. The whistle of winter wind replaced the whistle of arrows. Cavalry standards dipped once toward a skyline they would never test. A single failed liver had outranked 1,000,000 sharpened blades. Centuries rolled and left a stranger legacy spread across living faces. 16 million men today trace their Y chromosomes to one steppe warlord. The math hides in villages along rivers and alleys behind markets. A father tells a boy how to saddle a pony, and the strand carries forward like a whispered order. Blood advanced where banners finally stopped. The empire withdrew and still did not retreat. Those genes moved through peace as easily as armies move through fog. Traders married into towns they once raided. Captive girls bore sons who spoke the conqueror's sounds. The war ended, and the lineage kept marching, not with drums, with birthdays. A quiet campaign stretched from Beijing's walls to forests beyond the Danube. The hoofbeats never truly ceased. They softened. Modern Mongolians live with this inheritance like weather. Pride when elders speak the old names. Grief when historians recite the costs. Children ride in summer festivals. Sing songs that carry old cadences shaped by grassland winds. They laugh. They mourn. They keep the story in both hands without dropping either side. The silence after that holds its own weight. The price of crafting perfect killers shows up in places without spears. in the empty gaze of veterans who never learned to stop scanning doors, in descendants who carry a stranger's history inside their blood, in nations that survived because one man raised too many cups. The bill arrives in generations, not seasons, and the interest never stops compounding. We followed the method from cradle through nerge through siege and speed. We tracked the way fear grew tall as pyramids and how messages outran seasons. We stood in a tent where breath failed and heard an empire turn on a single sound. The greatest machine ever built burned itself with its own fuel. Bones remember, so do veins. The steppes still hold the rhythm. Wind over grass, larks at dawn, hoofbeats that once measured empire. A mother still whispers a hard name to a newborn, hoping spirits pass him by. Somewhere, a rider changes horses in darkness, doing what his ancestors taught without words. The system echoes even when the war ends, and one winter night still outshouts a century of victories. The men who carried death like a craft stood helpless before an ordinary vice. Wine toppled what walls could not slow. Discipline forged in ice cracked under a warm cup. No general plotted this save. No shaman called it down. Biology reached into history and turned the tide with a simple failure. Half a world woke up because one man didn't. So when you hear the old mother's curse name that kept a child from raiders, remember the last cup in that felt tent. The empire built on becoming not human halted because its Khan stayed human, and that frailty saved half the world.